The Grand Conclave of the Galactic Concordat was a monument to the staggering diversity of sentient life. Held within the hollowed-out heart of a rogue planetoid designated Citadel Prime, its central chamber was a spectacle of controlled chaos. Gravity plates shifted to accommodate beings from worlds light and heavy. Atmospheric generators shimmered, creating localized pockets of methane, ammonia, or superoxygenated air around the floating daises of the delegates. The air itself was a symphony of 1,000 alien scents, from the ozone and brimstone musk of the Cathar to the delicate lilac-like fragrance of the oculi blossoms. And into this pageantry of cosmic power, this display of horns, carapaces, energy shields, and ceremonial weaponry, walked Ambassador Elias Vance of Earth. He was, to the assembled senses of the galaxy, catastrophically underwhelming. From his observation dais, Chief Analyst Xyler of the Zalosian technocracy adjusted his optical sensors, zooming in on the new arrival. The Xylosians were a crystalline species, their multifaceted bodies catching and refracting the conclave's light. Their thoughts were as structured as their forms, built on logic, data, and uncompromising analysis. Xyler's analysis of the human was, to put it in the imprecise emotional language he so disdained, disappointing. "Lyra, confirm the sensor readings on the Terran delegate," Xyler subvocalized, his voice a series of soft, resonant chimes that only his aide could perceive. Lyra, a younger, more slender crystal formation, shimmered in confirmation. "Readings are stable, Chief Analyst. Standard carbon-based biology, bipedal, endoskeletal structure. The being is unadorned." "Unadorned is an understatement," Xyler chimed back. "Look at him." Elias Vance wore a simple, dark gray tunic and trousers made of a functional, self-repairing fabric. It was tailored, practical, and utterly devoid of meaning. It offered no clue to his rank, his lineage, or his personal history. His hands were bare. His belt held no tools, no sidearm, not even a decorative knife. He carried a small, flat datapad, and that was all. Xyler's gaze swept the chamber for contrast. Warlord Grakthal of the Cathar sat upon a throne of polished bone, his massive, furred frame draped in the hides of apex predators from his homeworld. At his hip rested a plasma axe, its power cell glowing with a menacing orange light, a weapon that had personally carved out a small subsector empire. The Lorian matriarch floated in a personal containment field, her ethereal, light-based form surrounded by a halo of orbiting defense drones, each one a work of lethal art. Even the pacifistic oculi, a sessile plant-like species, had their delegation dais guarded by thorny, semi-sentient vines capable of firing neurotoxin darts. Every species displayed its strength. It was the first rule of galactic diplomacy. A show of power was a show of respect. It demonstrated that you took the Concordat and your potential adversaries seriously. To come, unarmed, was not a statement of peace. It was a statement of irrelevance, or worse, an insult. "Perhaps their strength is technological," Lyra suggested. "Concealed devices, nanites, a personal shield generator of unusual subtlety." "Negative," Xyler replied, his internal scanners cross-referencing the human's energy signature with their database. "The Terran vessel in orbit is a diplomatic courier, moderately armed at best. His personal energy signature is flat. No active shielding, no bioaugmentations beyond standard medical maintenance. He is exactly what he appears to be, a single, soft-bodied organism with no discernible martial capacity." Across the chamber, Warlord Grakthal had also noticed the human. A low, guttural laugh, like rocks grinding together, echoed from the Cathar dais. He spoke to his second-in-command, but his voice was amplified for all to hear. "Look, Kragner, the prey things have sent a scribe to the table of hunters. Did it get lost on its way to the kitchens?" Several delegations chuckled. It was a cruel but, from their perspective, accurate assessment. Humanity was new to the galactic scene, a fledgling species from a dangerously competitive world, yet their representative looked like he was attending a university lecture, not a galactic summit. Elias Vance seemed not to hear. He found the dais marked with the simple icon for Sol System, Terra, and took his seat. He placed his datapad on the console, his movements calm and economical. His gaze swept the vast chamber once. a slow, methodical pan that took in every delegate, every guard, every architectural detail, before settling on the central holographic display where the day's agenda was forming. Xyler's sensors noted a fractional increase in the human's heart rate as he performed the scan, but his external expression remained one of placid neutrality. "He is observing," Xyler noted. "His visual acuity is high and his pattern recognition seems to be running constantly." "Observing what?" Lyra chimed. "The inevitable mockery he is about to endure." The formal session began. The topic was tedious: the revision of hyperspace lane tariffs near the Cerulean Nebula. The Cathar argued for military priority access. The Mercantile Guild of Cygnus X1 whined about profit margins. The Lorians communicated in silent, complex bursts of light that the universal translator struggled to parse into concepts of shared spiritual passage. Through it all, Vance was silent. He listened. He made a few notes on his datapad. When directly addressed by the moderator about humanity's position, he gave a brief, polite statement about requiring more data before committing to a stance, a standard diplomatic deflection. The session dragged on. Xyler found his attention drifting back to the human. The creature's stillness was unnatural. Most organic species fidgeted. They adjusted their posture, scratched, preened. Vance sat with an economy of motion that was almost unnerving. It wasn't the rigid stillness of a machine, but the patient, coiled stillness of a predator waiting by a water hole. Xyler dismissed the thought. It was an illogical, romantic notion. The data was clear. This was a soft, unarmed creature. During a recess, the delegates mingled in the antechamber, a vast space with soaring ceilings and alcoves offering refreshments suited to 100 different biologies. Vance acquired a small bulb of water and stood near an observation window overlooking the docked ships. He was alone. Most delegates gave him a wide berth, not out of fear, but out of a sort of social awkwardness. He was an anomaly they didn't know how to categorize. Xyler decided to gather more direct data. He glided his crystalline form towards the human, his aide Lyra trailing behind. "Ambassador Vance," Xyler's translated voice was a monotone hum. "I am Chief Analyst Xyler of the Zalosian Technocracy. I confess, your species is a recent addition to our Galactic Codex. Your presentation is unique." Vance turned. His eyes, two dark circles in a pale face, met Xyler's central optical sensor. There was a flicker of something in their depths, curiosity perhaps, not intimidation. "Analyst Xyler, an honor," Vance said, his voice even. "Unique. I would have thought underdressed was the more common sentiment." A corner of his mouth twitched, a gesture the database identified as a small smile, a sign of non-aggression. "Conformity to galactic martial tradition is a data point we have come to expect," Xyler stated. "Its absence is statistically significant. Your people have no martial traditions, no ceremonial weapons, no symbols of strength." "Oh, we have them," Vance said, taking a sip of water. "Enough to fill 1,000 museums. We've just learned they cause more problems than they solve. When everyone brings a bigger knife to the negotiation, eventually someone gets stabbed. We prefer to leave the knives at home." "A noble sentiment," Xyler hummed, though his internal processors labeled it naive and evolutionarily disadvantageous. "But it leaves you vulnerable. Power recognizes power. Here, a plasma axe is a statement of capability. Your emptiness is a statement of what exactly?" Before Vance could answer, a heavy presence loomed over them. Warlord Grakthal, flanked by two of his hulking warriors, had decided the human needed a more personal welcome. The Cathar was even larger up close, a mountain of muscle and matted fur, smelling of burnt metal and animal musk. His tusks were yellowed and sharp. "The little scribe speaks of leaving knives at home," Grakthal growled, his voice a low-frequency rumble that vibrated in Vance's chest. "That is because a scribe has no idea how to use one. Your people are soft. You hide on your dirt ball and send a pet to speak for you." Vance didn't flinch. He didn't back away. He simply stood his ground, looking up at the massive alien. "Warlord Grakthal, humanity is pleased to make your acquaintance. I am Ambassador Elias Vance." Grakthal scoffed, a spray of foul-smelling vapor erupting from his nostrils. He gestured with a three-fingered claw at Vance's simple tunic. "This is your ambassador. He looks like a freshly hatched grub." In the Cathar Imperium, an ambassador is a warrior first, a diplomat second. He must be able to kill his enemies with his own hands if need be. What can your hands do, little grub? Fold parchment? To emphasize his point, Gracthal reached out and jabbed a thick, armored finger into Vance's shoulder. It wasn't a friendly gesture. It was a physical assertion of dominance, a test. The impact was solid enough to make a lesser being stumble. Vance barely moved. He absorbed the impact, his body giving with it for a fraction of an inch and then holding firm. He looked at the point of contact on his shoulder, then back up at Gracthal. His expression didn't change. It was still one of mild, academic interest. "My hands," Vance said, his voice dangerously quiet, "can get the job done." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't issue a threat. But for a fleeting moment, Xyler's sensors detected a cascade of physiological changes in the human. A spike in adrenaline and norepinephrine, a minute tightening of the muscles in his neck and shoulders. His pupils dilated by a barely perceptible 2%. It was the classic textbook biological prelude to a violent physical confrontation, a fight-or-flight response. But Vance did neither. He simply stood there, a coiled spring that refused to release. Gracthal seemed momentarily confused by the lack of a frightened or aggressive response. He grunted, a sound of contempt, and turned away. "Do not waste my time, plaything." As the Cathar stomped off, Xyler analyzed the brief encounter. The human had been physically challenged and insulted. He had exhibited the physiological signs of preparing for violence. And yet he had done nothing. Logically, this pointed to cowardice, a realization of his own physical inferiority, but Xyler's logic core was troubled. The human's eyes, they hadn't shown fear, they had shown assessment. In the split second that Gracthal had jabbed him, Vance's gaze had flicked down to the warlord's unarmored knee joint, then to the heavy ceremonial medallion hanging around his neck, then to the plasma axe on his hip. It was an involuntary, lightning-fast series of calculations. "His threat assessment protocols are running at a high level," Xyler chimed quietly to Lyra. "He is constantly evaluating his environment for tactical advantages and disadvantages." "A product of an evolutionary history on a death world, perhaps," Lyra offered. "A primal, paranoid instinct." "Perhaps," Xyler agreed, but he was beginning to suspect it was something more. The human wasn't unarmed. His weapon was simply invisible. It was the space between his ears. And Xyler, for the first time, felt a tremor of something his people had long since engineered out of their consciousness. He felt unease. Back in his analysis suite, Xyler dedicated a significant portion of his processing power to the human databank. The official files were dry: history, culture, basic biology. He pushed deeper into the uncurated, raw data streams humanity had provided as a gesture of transparency. It was a chaotic mess of information, what the humans called an internet. He filtered for biology and evolutionary science. The results were perplexing. He projected a holographic model of the human skeletal and muscular system for Lyra. "Observe," Xyler chimed. "The shoulder joint, a full 360 degrees of rotation, unstable, prone to dislocation, but it allows for a powerful, accurate overhand throwing motion. No other species in the Concordat has this. Most evolved to claw, crush, or gore at close range." He highlighted the legs and hips. "Note the Achilles tendon, the long leg bones, the gluteal muscles. This is a creature built not for sprinting, but for endurance. Their primary cooling mechanism, perspiration, is remarkably efficient. In their primitive history, they did not outrun their prey. They simply ran it to death, pursuing it for hours or even days until the creature collapsed from exhaustion. Persistence hunting. The concept was alien to Xyler. Galactic evolution had favored ambush predators, armored grazers, or flying hunters. The idea of a soft, slow creature simply walking its prey to death was bizarre. It implied a psychological fortitude that was as much a weapon as any claw or fang. "They are also omnivorous generalists," Lyra added, pulling up another file, "capable of deriving sustenance from a staggering range of organic matter. Their digestive system is highly adaptable. It makes them difficult to poison and allows them to survive in almost any ecosystem." "Generalists, not specialists," Xyler mused. "The Cathar are apex predators, but only in the specific ecosystems of their homeworld. The Lorians are masters of energy manipulation, but physically fragile. The humans, they are moderately capable at everything. They can run but not the fastest. They can climb but not the best. They are strong but not the strongest. Their primary evolutionary advantage seems to be adaptability. He pulled up a file on human tool use. It was vast, explosive, from chipped rocks to fusion reactors in a geological blink of an eye. But what struck Xyler was the improvisation. There were records of their soldiers in primitive wars using anything and everything as weapons. Sharpened sticks, rocks, cans of food in a sock, a writing instrument jammed into an artery. Their entire history is a testament to weaponizing their environment, Xyler stated, a new level of understanding dawning. They don't see a rock. They see a projectile, a hammer, a knife in waiting. They don't see a stick. They see a spear, a club, a lever. The pieces were beginning to slot together. The lack of ceremonial weapons wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a sign of supreme confidence. Why carry a dedicated weapon when everything was a potential weapon? It was an expression of an evolutionary truth so profound that the rest of the galaxy had missed it entirely. They weren't looking at an unarmed scribe. They were looking at the galaxy's most adaptable predator, standing in the middle of a room filled with ammunition. The second day of the conclave saw the tension escalate. The Cathar, emboldened by what they perceived as Vance's cowardice, became more aggressive in their diplomatic posturing. Gracthal openly called for humanity's vote to be nullified on the grounds that they were a non-viable martial species, incapable of contributing to the Concordat's mutual defense. The Concordat is built on the strength of its members, he roared from his dais, his plasma axe pulsing with light. We face the Void Swarm, the Signan pirates, the threats from beyond the galactic rim. What can these soft skins offer? Sharpened words, harsh language. When the hordes are at the gate, will they send their poets to negotiate? The argument found traction with several of the other martial races. To them, it was simple logic. Strength was the only currency that truly mattered. Vance remained impassive, absorbing the insults without reaction. He simply waited for his turn to speak. When the moderator finally acknowledged him, the chamber fell into a curious silence. What could the human possibly say? Warlord Gracthal makes a valid point, Vance began, his calm voice a stark contrast to the Cathar's bellowing. Strength is essential for survival, and humanity agrees that any member of this Concordat must be able to contribute to its defense. The Warlord is correct to question our capabilities. A murmur went through the assembly. Was the human about to concede? However, Vance continued, the Warlord's definition of strength seems limited. He sees strength in the edge of an axe, the armor on his back. These are indeed forms of strength, but they are external. They can be taken, broken, or rendered obsolete by new technology. Humanity's strength is not something we carry, it is something we are. Gracthal slammed a massive fist on his console. Empty words. The Grubman speaks in riddles because he has nothing else. I say, prove it. Prove this internal strength, or be silent and let the warriors decide the fate of the galaxy. He was goading him, trying to force a reaction. But Vance did not take the bait. Proof is not offered in boasts, Warlord. It is demonstrated when required. Until such a time, humanity will continue to observe, to learn, and to vote as a full member of this Concordat. The defiance, cloaked in polite diplomatic language, was more infuriating to Gracthal than any open challenge would have been. His face, a mask of fur and rage, contorted. He had been publicly stonewalled by the Grubman. In Cathar culture, such an insult could not be borne. His honor and the honor of his clan demanded a reckoning. Xyler observed the exchange with a growing sense of dread. The Cathar were a predictable species. Their reactions were governed by a rigid code of honor and dominance. Gracthal had been maneuvered into a corner by Vance's calm refusal to play his game. A Cathar warrior, when cornered, does not retreat. He attacks. That evening the situation came to a head. An unscheduled security alert suddenly echoed through the conclave. Red lights flashed, and blast doors began to descend, sealing off the main chamber and antechambers. It was a classic tactic for isolating a target. Xyler, caught in the Grand Hall with Vance and a handful of other delegates, immediately knew what was happening. This wasn't a drill. It was a coup de theater Cathar style. And then they entered, not through the main doors but crashing through a set of decorative crystalline windows. Grakthul, his plasma axe humming to life, flanked by not two but four of his elite guard, all armed with energized glaives. They ignored the other delegates, their eyes, burning with red fury, fixed on one target, Elias Vance. The other delegates scrambled back in panic. The Lorian matriarch's drones formed a defensive circle. The oculi retracted into their dais. Xyler and Lyra flattened themselves against a wall, observing, recording. "You have insulted my clan," Grakthul bellowed, his voice echoing in the now sealed chamber. "You have mocked our strength. The Concordat's rules are suspended by my challenge. Here and now, human, you will prove your worth, or your species will be expunged from the galactic record." It was a formal challenge of annihilation, a brutal and archaic Cathar tradition. There was no diplomacy left. This would be settled by blood. Vance stood alone in the center of the vast floor. He looked at the 5 heavily armed, armored warriors advancing on him. He looked at the sealed blast doors. He looked at the terrified faces of the other delegates. Then he did something no one expected. He sighed. A quiet, weary sound. The sigh of a man who had hoped for a simple day at the office and was, once again, being forced to deal with lethal inconveniences. He slowly unfastened the top button of his tunic, allowing for a little more freedom of movement. His eyes, which had been placid and diplomatic for 2 days, changed. The mild curiosity was gone, replaced by a flat, cold focus. It was a look that Xyler's analytical mind could finally put a name to, dredged up from the deepest, most primal parts of humanity's own data files. It was the look of a hunter who has just spotted his quarry and is beginning the chase. The 5 Cathar spread out, forming a semicircle to cut off any escape. One of them, eager to claim first blood, charged forward, his glaive held high for a crushing overhead blow. Vance didn't retreat. He didn't even look at the charging warrior. His attention was on the refreshment alcove a few feet to his left. With a calm, deliberate motion, he stepped towards it. The charging Cathar was almost upon him. The energized blade of the glaive screamed as it sliced through the air. At the last possible fraction of a second, Vance moved. He didn't dodge so much as flow. He took one sideways step, letting the warrior's momentum carry him past. As the Cathar thundered by, Vance's hand shot out and grabbed the heaviest object on the refreshment trolley. A thick, crystalline carafe filled with the viscous, purple nectar favored by the Glyptons. It was an ornate, heavy thing, meant for ceremony, not combat. Vance's body moved with a grace that belied his simple appearance. He pivoted on his heel, his entire body uncoiling. His shoulder, with its uniquely human range of motion, whipped his arm forward. The carafe became an extension of his will. He didn't throw it. He brought it crashing down on the back of the Cathar's helmet. The sound was a sickening crunch of shattering crystal and groaning metal. The helmet dented, its internal electronics sparking, but Vance wasn't done. The carafe shattered, but he held onto the neck, the jagged edges now forming a makeshift blade. More importantly, the thick, sticky purple nectar splashed all over the Cathar's head and chest. The warrior stumbled, shaking his head, trying to clear his vision. The nectar was like glue, sealing his eyelids, clogging his respiratory vents. He clawed at his face, making choking, gagging sounds. His glaive clattered to the floor. He was out of the fight, incapacitated not by the blow itself, but by the liquid the container had carried. One down. Less than 3 seconds had passed. A collective gasp went through the alien observers. Xyler's processors worked furiously. Improvised bludgeon, environmental exploitation, use of secondary properties of an object, in this case viscosity and adhesiveness, as a disabling agent. The second Cathar warrior, seeing his comrade fall, advanced more cautiously, his glaive held in a defensive stance. Vance dropped the broken neck of the carafe and backed away, his eyes scanning, calculating. He was now near the dais of the Zalosian delegation. On the console lay one of Xyler's own tools, a solid-state data stylus, about 20 centimeters long, made of a dense, conductive metallic alloy, sharpened to a fine point for precise work on crystalline interfaces. As the second warrior lunged, Vance snatched the stylus from the console. The Cathar thrust his glaive forward. It was a move designed to impale a foe. Vance didn't try to block it. He ducked under the thrust, the energized blade hissing inches over his head. He was now inside the warrior's guard, too close for the long weapon to be effective. The Cathar tried to bring the butt of the glaive around to strike him, but Vance was faster. He rose up, the data stylus held in a tight, reverse grip. With the full force of his body behind the motion, he drove the pointed end of the stylus into a tiny gap in the Cathar's armor, right below the armpit, where a bundle of major nerves and blood vessels ran close to the surface. It was a target no larger than a small coin, a detail that would only be known from a deep, academic study of Cathar physiology, or from the practical experience of a battlefield medic, or from a species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of killing things by poking them with sharp sticks. The warrior gave a strangled cry, a sound of pure shock and agony. His entire arm went numb and useless, the nerve cluster severed. The glaive fell from his paralyzed hand. Vance gave him a hard shove, sending him stumbling backward into a decorative fountain. 2 down. The total engagement time was now perhaps 7 seconds. Gracthul roared in fury. This was not how this was supposed to happen. He and the remaining 2 warriors charged together, determined to overwhelm the human with sheer force. Vance was already moving. He didn't run. He flowed. He used the very layout of the Grand Hall as his shield and his weapon. He vaulted over a low, decorative railing, putting a barrier between himself and the charging aliens. On the wall behind the railing was a long, heavy tapestry depicting the founding of the Concordat. As the first of the 2 warriors clambered over the railing after him, Vance grabbed the bottom of the tapestry with both hands and ripped it from its magnetic clasps. The heavy, woven fabric, weighted with metallic threads, fell directly onto the warrior, enveloping him completely. The Cathar thrashed, blinded and tangled, caught in a net of his own making. He was momentarily helpless. Improvised entanglement weapon. Use of visual obstruction. Zyler's analysis was becoming frantic. This was not combat. This was a physics problem being solved with lethal efficiency. Gracthul and the final warrior ignored their ensnared comrade and split up to flank Vance. Gracthul went left, Vance saw, so he went right. He moved towards a bank of universal translation kiosks. The last warrior was fast, cornering him against the kiosks. He swung his glaive in a wide, decapitating arc. Vance ducked, the sizzling blade passing through the space his head had just occupied and embedding itself in the wall behind him. For a moment the warrior was overextended, his weapon stuck. It was all the time Vance needed. His hand shot out and grabbed the flexible power conduit that connected a kiosk to the floor port. With a sharp, violent jerk, he ripped it free. Sparks flew from the frayed end. A blue corona of raw energy crackled around the exposed wiring. The warrior, realizing his mistake, tried to pull his glaive free. But Vance was on him, whipping the live power conduit like a bullwhip. The sparking end struck the Cathar's armored chest. It wasn't enough to penetrate the armor, but Vance wasn't aiming for the armor. He whipped it again, this time aiming for the warrior's unarmored hand, wrapped around the hilt of his glaive. The conduit made contact. Thousands of volts surged through the conductive metal of the weapon, through the warrior's hand and up his arm. The Cathar screamed, a high-pitched sound of agony as his entire nervous system was overloaded. His muscles seized, his fur stood on end, and he collapsed to the floor, smoke pouring from the joints in his armor. He twitched once, then lay still. 4 down. Silence descended, broken only by the hum of the live conduit in Vance's hand and the muffled struggles of the warrior still tangled in the tapestry. And then there was only Gracthul. The Cathar warlord stood 20 feet away, his plasma axe held in a 2-handed grip. He was panting, his initial rage now mixed with a dawning, terrifying confusion. 4 of his best warriors, armed and armored, had been defeated in under a minute by one unarmored creature using junk. Garbage, hall decorations. What are you? Gracthul growled, the words lacking their earlier conviction. Vance dropped the power conduit. It sparked harmlessly on the floor. He didn't pick up any of the fallen glaives. He simply stood there, his hands empty once more. "I am Elias Vance, ambassador for Earth," he said, his voice as calm as it had been during the tariff debate. "And I am very, very tired of this." He started walking towards Gracthal, not running, just walking, a steady, unhurried pace. The pace of a persistent hunter who knows his prey is already exhausted. Gracthal, for the first time in his life, felt a prickle of genuine fear. This creature wasn't fighting him. It was dismantling him. It wasn't abiding by any rules of combat he understood. It was using the universe as a weapon against him. He looked at his plasma axe. It was a tool for killing, a powerful one, but it was only one tool. The humans seemed to have an infinite number. He tightened his grip on the axe and charged, bellowing a final war cry that was equal parts fury and terror. Vance met the charge. He sidestepped the massive swing of the axe, the blade carving a molten furrow in the floor where he had been standing. As Gracthal's momentum carried him forward, Vance stepped in close, grabbing the warlord's thick, furred arm with one hand. With his other, he reached up and seized the heavy, ornate medallion that hung around Gracthal's neck on a thick, chain-link cord. He didn't try to break the chain. He didn't try to choke him. He yanked the chain hard, pulling Gracthal's head down, and simultaneously drove his knee up into the warlord's face. There was a wet crunch as cartilage and bone broke. Gracthal roared in pain, stumbling back, his nose a shattered ruin. But Vance held onto the chain. Using it as a leash, he spun Gracthal around, disorienting the massive alien, and slammed his head backward into the thick, armored glass of the observation window they had been standing near during their first conversation. The glass starred but didn't break. Vance slammed him again. A crack appeared. And again. This time the glass shattered. Gracthal, dazed and bleeding, was pushed halfway through the frame, overlooking the dizzying drop to the docking bay far below. Vance still held the chain. He could have pushed him. He could have ended it right there. Instead, he let go. Gracthal slumped to the floor, groaning, his great weapon, the plasma axe, lying forgotten several feet away. The fight was over. Elias Vance stood, breathing a little heavily now, a single drop of the warlord's dark, purplish blood on his cheek. He wiped it away with the back of his hand. He looked at the carnage. 4 incapacitated warriors, 1 defeated warlord. He straightened his tunic, which was now slightly askew. He then turned to face the stunned, silent assembly of delegates. "The challenge is met," he said, his voice echoing in the dead quiet of the grand hall. "Humanity's seat is secure. Now, if there are no further objections, I believe we were discussing hyperspace tariffs." No one spoke. No one moved. They stared at the scene, at the fallen Cathar, at the improvised weapons lying scattered across the floor. The shattered carafe, the blood-tipped data stylus, the torn tapestry, the sparking power conduit, the warlord's own medallion. They weren't just objects anymore. They were artifacts of a terrifying revelation. In his observation suite, Lyra turned to Xyler. She was vibrating with shock. "By the crystal heart, what was that?" Xyler did not answer for a long time. His mind, a machine of pure logic, was replaying every second of the confrontation, but this time, it was overlaid with the data from his earlier research. The shoulder designed for throwing. The body designed for endurance. The mind designed to see a weapon in everything. The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture of horrifying clarity. "We have been asking the wrong question, Lyra," Xyler chimed at last, his voice a low, somber tone. "For 2 days we have been asking, where are the humans' weapons?" He turned his optical sensors from the carnage on the floor to the lone figure of Elias Vance, who was calmly walking back to his dais. "The correct question," Xyler continued, his voice barely a whisper, "is what isn't the human's weapon?" A profound, species-altering silence settled over his consciousness as the answer presented itself. Nothing. There was nothing in the entire, vast, glorious, and terrible universe that a human could not, with a bit of time and ingenuity, turn into a weapon. The rocks of a barren moon, the gases of a nebula, the decorative architecture of a diplomatic hall, the very laws of physics themselves. Their bodies were the wielders, but their minds were the forge. They didn't carry weapons because they were, themselves, the weapon. They walked into a room, and the room itself became their arsenal. The delegates looked at Elias Vance, then they looked around the hall. They saw their consoles, their tools, the very chairs they sat on, not as objects of function and art, but as a potential inventory of death. The universe had suddenly become a much more dangerous place, not because a new monster had been revealed, but because they had finally understood the nature of the quiet, unassuming creature who had just joined their table. Respect. That was the first emotion. But beneath it, sinking deep into the core of every being present, was a cold, primal, and entirely logical terror. They were in a room with the most dangerous thing in the galaxy, and they hadn't even known it. And the most terrifying part of all, he was smiling at them, a polite, diplomatic smile, as if he was ready to get back to business. As if he hadn't just single-handedly proven that his species didn't need an army to wage a war. They just needed one of their scribes, and a room with enough things in it.